let's get on to this episode. And it's another 100 episodes in the books. We've reached the 300 mark, but let's start the show with a look back at episodes 201 to now and what's happened in the world of darts since May 2021. What has most caught your eye?
Yeah, I mean, May 2021 is like a weird time in history because at that point we were already a year into the pandemic. We were all used to it, but we also didn't know what was going to happen a week from now because that was, right at the outbreak of the Delta wave, right before, rather, the outbreak of the Delta wave that really took all the progress from months of vaccination drive and threw it into question. And still, it was looking like we were starting to have events in front of crowds. We weren't sure if that was going to continue. There was still the question, especially about whether events could go forward in Germany where higher restrictions were going on. So thinking back to May 2021, it was a weird time in the history of darts. But boy, how have things changed in just a little under 2 years. And if you look at what happened from that point on, we started to see crowds return, obviously at the World Match Play that summer. We'll come back to that. And then at the, as the year went on, especially at the World Championships, when we had full crowds. Granted, we didn't get all the matches played. We had a bunch of players had to pull out due to COVID that year. But then especially as we head into 2022 and finally had really a return to normalcy, the 13 Euro Tour events back on the calendar like things used to have been, all the majors back in their normal time frame with the exception of the Champions League, which has not returned since pre-pandemic times, but everything else returned in their normal calendar spot with a full crowd. And we've really had now a little over a year of the old normal being the new normal again. Some of the old normal has not returned. And the biggest part of that is dominance at the top. Yes, by May 2021, Michael van Gerwen was no longer the dominant force he had once been. In fact, he hadn't won an event yet in that calendar year, and he didn't win one all the way until well into the autumn when he won the Nordic Darts Masters over Fallon Sherrick. He added a Players' Championship event as well. But he ended the year with just 2 titles, a far cry from the 20-plus that he had done a few years earlier. And while 2022 saw him really rebound, winning 4 major titles, winning a bunch of others, and we've seen signs that he will do that again this year. He hasn't won a major yet, but he's lost a pair of finals, and he's top of the Premier League table by 5 points. He's not back to that dominance he was before that. What has replaced it? Well, what we've seen is a lot of breakthrough successes and a lot of real surprises as well. Ross Smith and Andrew Gilding were not 2 players we would have tipped if you asked me in May 2021 at our 200th episode who will become a first-time major by first-time major champion by episode 300. Both of them have, and both of them deservedly so. Ross Smith was the best player in the European Championships. Andrew Gilding, I wouldn't say he was the best player in the UK Open, but he played very, very well. And he's been the best player in some other tournaments so far over the last year and a half that he didn't win. But it was also breakthroughs for players we had been waiting to see them break through. Obviously, Joe Cullen a little over a year ago winning the Masters, a player that was a fly on the dartboard away from making the World Match Play final a few years ago. Didn't make it, lost that match to Gary Anderson, and then couldn't find his way back in a major despite having chances, having the dart at Bull to beat MVG, of course, but then finally got his chance at the Masters last year and went on and won it. He's, of course, not the only one to break through. Chris Dobie this year as well at the Masters, but the big one, of course, was Michael Smith at the 9th time of asking, winning a major final at the Grand Slam last year. And then, the World Championships is not as big as the Grand Slam. It's just a small little event. He added that as a second prize as well and also became world number 1. No big deal. But we've seen so many breakthroughs over the last few years, and we've seen a diversity of winners that we have not had before. It's been a really fascinating, not quite 2 years, but 23 months. And there's no sign of it slowing down. Yes, Michael van Gerwen is better than he was 2 years ago, but so many players are as well. And now we have Gerwyn Price, who was the world number 1 when we had our 200th episode. He's now world number 4, but I think he is a much more complete player now than he was then. So too for almost everyone in the top 10. I think that's the big thing that's changed. Now we have so many players who believe that they can win titles, and they've actually gone and done it. And that's been the big thing that's happened from episode 200 to episode 300.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. And you said it at the start there, May 2021, almost 2 years ago now, and the situation that we were in the world back then, still in the pandemic, and darts, as far as in the UK, was still behind closed doors. And later that month, we did see small crowds start to come back with the last block of Premier League nights in Milton Keynes, up to 1,000 fans in for each of those nights. Milton Keynes, of course, back then was the new home of World Darts, was hosting a lot of the events, and things were different back then because we had the last league night of the Premier League, and then the next night was the playoffs, and we saw Johnny Clayton, one of the guests on the show this week, won the last game of the league phase to get that fourth spot, get into the playoffs. And then the following night, 24 hours later, wins the playoffs and gets his hands on the biggest invitational title there is in the game. And you look what he went on to go and do later that year as well, winning more titles. Peter Wright won a few big titles that year, and going into 2022, becoming world champion for the second time. And 2022, we, as you say, we did see Michael van Gerwen get back on top at times, winning the Premier League, the match play, the Grand Prix, other titles as well. But as you say as well, the first time winners, something that we saw happen during the pandemic, that's something that has carried on with the likes of Danny Noppert, Ross Smith. But I think one of the most high profile stories in darts the last 2 years has been Michael Smith becoming that major winner, because he's come close on so many occasions, finally getting over the line at the Grand Slam, then winning the World Championships and becoming the new world number one. And it's something that a lot of people in the sport thought would happen, and he's finally got there. And it has been an interesting period these last 2 years, because we have seen spells where there's been certain players, they've looked untouchable. I think of Peter Wright, the World Match Play 2021 was Phil Taylor-esque in that week, and we thought he's going to take some real stopping if he carries on playing like that. And the same with Michael van Gerwen. He's had spells where he's looked untouchable, and the last few weeks, Gerwyn Price, the run that he's had winning those Euro Tours, and Michael Smith coming back into it just this past weekend, winning on the Euro Tour. So yeah, I think what you say is right there. In this current era of the PDC at that highest level, it is difficult to sustain that spell of dominance, because there are so many players now capable of winning these events. And just away from the PDC, outside of the PDC, what we've seen the last 2 years, we've had the Women's World Championship come back via the WDF after a 2-year absence. And I think the women's game is something that has got a lot of interest. And the PDC, we've seen their interest in the women's game grow with the Women's Series, with their own televised event, the Women's World Match Play as well, the dominance of Bo Greaves. And you think of the potential that she's got. You go to Luke Littler as well, the potential he's got at just 16 years old, his debut at the UK Open recently, and what he did on the development tour, winning 2 titles. So there's 2 young players there still in their teams that have got real bright futures in the game. And I think the PDC, they've got their house in order. They're now making strides again after the pandemic halted their progress a little bit. They're now pushing into new territories. The World Series coming up in Poland. They're looking at other places. We had Bahrain at the start of the year. But I think as far as the rest of what we've got, there's not really a clear number 2 at the moment, as it used to be. We had the PDC, then the BDO. At the moment, we've got the PDC clear at the top. Underneath that, you've got the WDF, you've got the ADC, Modus, the Seniors Tour. They've all got their place, but we don't have a clear number 2 at the moment. They're all doing their part, and it's going to be interesting, I think, to see where we are in 2 years from now as regards to that second rung on the ladder, if you like, organisations outside the PDC, because I think they've all got their place in darts, but as far as how far they all progress over these next 2 years, I think that's something to keep an eye on.